Hi, Peter Boolkah here, and welcome to today's edition of The Transition Guy. Now, joining me today in the studio is Trivelle Simpson, who is the founder and CEO of the Drive Group. Welcome to the show, Trivelle.
Thank you so much for having me, Peter. Appreciate it.
So, Trivelle, what is the Drive Group and why does it exist?
Yeah, the Drive Group started out as a think tank. So my initial step into entrepreneurship was actually in financial markets, taking a study of derivatives trading. My vocation coming out of school, I was a political science major. So we took a view of politics and how it affected the economy, and then made financial decisions based off that. That's how the Drive Group started. It was a small group of people trying to make financial decisions based off political subtext globally.
That must be interesting for you right now, then.
Yes. I tell you, I say to everyone, the greatest credit I give to my team is that we've traded through. The business was founded in 2016, so it's been a fun ride. We've gone through Brexit, we've gone through a Donald Trump presidency, we've gone through COVID, and we're still open. So there's something about us that, at least we try and keep our market assumptions tight. And in terms of bolstering that position, it led to us making investments into real estate because diversification is always important. And then it also led to us wanting to, sort of motivated by my time at a startup as a head of operations. It was a tech startup. I realized that there was this need for funding for good, smart ideas. The process of receiving funding always felt so esoteric to me when I was sitting in that chair. So we created a venture arm that we felt was kind of direct. If you have a good idea, send an email. We will make sure it's reviewed, and we'll double down on it if it's something that we see can have value.
Okay, so interesting. So VC funding is really an important part of especially startups that want to scale up.
Yeah.
But from my time, especially being involved, coming in quite late on, whether it's Series 2 or the third round of funding, is by that time, very often what we found is that the founders have potentially screwed up the business. They've given away the majority of their business. VC funders have kind of lost the money in that investment, and it doesn't work. So you going down this funding route, which I agree is needed, have you managed to circumvent the screw-ups that typically happen when VC funding comes into play without the right level of support?
I would like to think that we have the system in place that will avoid that, but I think you'll know from experience, it'll be years before we determine how that goes, because if you picked a horse, you keep betting on the horse, right? So we're still optimistic about all of our positions. But I'd like to think that I look at VC funding from the position of a founder. I wasn't a founder at the previous company. I was an entrepreneur. But I bled that blood. I shed those tears. I knew what it was to go into a room with your heart and soul, pitch a product and beg, not beg, but hope that someone resonates with that. I know that passion. Unfortunately, I know what it is to. There's terrible stories of VC funding, right? You have Elizabeth Holmes in Theranos, day before her pitch, she fakes the machine. But it's weird because I've been in a room and I know I remember that moment where the idea is, hey, the meeting's tomorrow, we're not ready. What are we gonna do? And I think of Bill Gurley, Thomas Kalanick, the initial investor into Uber, and how much I remember. The story says that when Thomas met Bill, he was nervous, shaking, bought all the cabs to stay away from the restaurant so that Bill would be forced to call an Uber at the end of the meeting. This was a guy he wanted to impress. Years later, to get Thomas Kalanick out, he says, "I'll walk, but you got to get Bill Gurley off the board." It ends up hating the guy. So when I try to look at these stories as cautionary tales, that this is it's a razor's edge, but the core concept, I think, for any venture investment is you got to trust your founder. You have to like your founder more than you like the idea. That's my policy. If you like the idea, but you don't like the driver of the idea, there's no point, because at the end of the day, it's not your idea. So you got to like the founder more than you like the idea. I think if you do that, then you have more likelihood for success than not. Because like I said, Bill Gurley gets kicked off the Uber board, but Bill Gurley was paid to do that. It wasn't a bad investment. It was just a bad relationship. And, you know, when people asked Bill, Bill said, I thought Thomas was a genius. So I try to look at it from that perspective.
That's interesting. Actually, in the UK, we've got an entrepreneur called Stephen Bartlett. And
I like Stephen.
Yeah, and I just caught him on an interview recently, and he basically said, like, in his experience doing sort of the whole Dragon's Den, at the beginning, the big mistake he made was he backed the idea. By the time he came to the second series, he was backing the horse. And I suppose, yep, it's great to back the horse. And I think the step that's missing with VC funding is back the horse and then put the support in place. So that, because the person with a great idea doesn't have the experience to run the business or the organization. Correct. Yeah, but you actually had the great idea and the support structure in place to basically mentor them and I don't mean mentor them from afar, but you work for a corporate business. I mean, literally, the level of supervision there, you are trained to become that CEO or that exec and train them to become that entrepreneur. I think that a lot of these businesses that get access to funding will be far more successful, and actually the failure rate will drastically diminish.
I agree wholeheartedly. I think you even saw that with Meta. People always say, why did Facebook make such an issue with the metaverse? How'd they get that done? I'll give your audience some homework. I encourage you to look at who the business head of Facebook was and who quit, and then why they came out with the metaverse. There's one woman was driving Facebook's decisions when they were one of the fastest, strongest growing companies. It was not Zuckerberg. Now, Zuckerberg's a genius, but it took someone else to navigate that business. I don't think there's anything wrong with that.
No, I don't know. I agree with that. How important do you think it is having a varied resume when it comes to sort of overcoming the diverse challenges that we face within business?
Yeah, I think it depends where you sit. I was at a dinner the other day, mixed with different sort of people. All were presumed to be mildly successful. This is why they get invited. But what was interesting is I could see the difference between the people who worked for Google and had a high salary and the people who had to go kill their own animal, you know, as they say, bake their own bread, which is, I guess, what the entrepreneur is seeking to be, right?
Right.
And the secret was charisma. The entrepreneurs, it's weird. They were always selling. I mean, you felt they could walk into any room, been there for years. They made you feel like they were your best friend. It's charisma. So to that end, I think that the greatest tool any entrepreneur should know is it actually doesn't matter what you did. It matters how much charisma you left with, because charisma is what will drive you. Charisma is what gets you the funding. Charisma is what gets you to have a startup. When you think of a startup, you're underpaying and overworking people in pursuit of a vision. You know, you don't get that out of people without charisma. You have to be a charismatic leader. I grew up in church. I think about pastors. You know, I used to volunteer for hours for nothing, but it was just this. You know, you're swelled up in this concept, and I'd like to think that entrepreneurship is the same way. So, in terms of what is the different path, what is your different history? I mean, I myself, I was a political science major. I worked at the bank. I spent some time in the arts, and now I've ended up in finance. There's nothing linear about that story. However, in each iteration of every step I took, I did require charisma to make it to the next step. And I think that was more the muscle that I was evolving from strength to strength.
What is it about because I mean, you've talked about startups a number of times. Why do you think that you gravitate towards startups?
This is going to sound, hopefully I don't lose any of your audience when I say this. So I'm Canadian. Sorry.
That won't lose the audience. You're fine.
So, I'm Canadian. Canada is large in mass, small in people. So I didn't grow up thinking I could work for a Wells Fargo, a Citibank, a Google. They didn't have head offices where I grew up. So if you were coming from where I come from and you want to leave a mark, you got to build that company. So when I'm a kid and I'm looking at examples, I'm looking at the guys who made something out of their garage. You know, I'm looking at the people who came up with an idea with their close friends and then brought it global. And I think that's why it resonated with me, because it was the vision I could see from where I lived. Now, granted, I did go to school. I achieved my degree. There is a linear path that I tried to give myself at least a parachute. But when I thought of, throwing punches and being in the arena with the greats, I didn't think of being the CTO of YouTube or the next step at Google. I thought of, building a company that hops into the ring with the idols that I was studying.
Which is quite interesting, because that's probably quite different to living in a major city thinking, where perhaps people are more predisposed to going up there and getting that corporate career.
Yep.
Even though in the UK, I mean, everyone vies for working for a corporate. Yeah, in the UK, they only make up 10% of the economy. They probably hold 90% of the press, but only contribute 10% to the actual economy itself. It's quite bonkers, really, when you think about.
It's a perception, right?
Well, there is a perception and misconception, I think, both at the same time.
Yeah, I mean, it's the same argument with Manchester City, right? Manchester City is it's a huge club, but you've never met a Manchester City fan outside of the Etihad, right?
Yeah, you see, now we're moving towards politics. That's starting to get really dangerous.
I'm just bugging you. I'm bugging you.
But yeah, Pep's, I mean, look, Pep's a good example of a great leader, actually.
Amazing.
Probably one of the best managers in the sport across the globe.
I think the thing that marks Pep is his willingness to make a drastic decision and live with it. He doesn't dilly-dally, he doesn't waver. When he's at Barcelona and he decides, I don't want to play with Eto'o anymore. Eto'o is still firing on all cylinders. He says, no, not him. When many times he's made decisions and he was just willing to live with it. It's his call, so.
But isn't that what you have to? Isn't that what you have to do as an entrepreneur? Well, you should make the ones that are successful are the ones that make the decisions. The ones that die are the ones that fail to make decisions.
It's a balance, right? Because I think there's a world where you need, it's like if we're using the managerial concept, you can't lose the locker room. So, there's certain decisions you can't make, but it's also sensitivity to know the decisions you can make, right? I think of only because we're in football and I love football. I think Eto'o when he makes a strong decision against Alba, which was a tough one because he's a leader in the locker room, but notwithstanding not knowing what will happen at the league, I think that was a masterstroke of leadership because it did something to the locker room. It's almost like he almost lost it to gain it back, and of course that's what leadership and entrepreneurship is. You got to know when the tide is in your favor and make a drastic decision.
So you grew, growing up in the sticks and everything, and you've seen that, okay, starting a company up. When you actually started the current Drive Group, my question to you is, when it came to your first hires, what approach did you take and why?
So I love telling this story. So I grew up in a town called Brampton, which is outside of Toronto. Toronto's our major city, but I'm about 45 minutes away. My father had been in supervision his entire work career, production supervisor. He taught me from when I was a kid, your C-suite, your workers you pick for competency. So my first hire was my best friend because I knew I could trust him.
Right.
It was that. The first person with, if something happens to me, it's up to him. It's got to be a guy you trust deeply. As you get further out, then you make hires on, well, that person's really smart. That person's really wise. That person can bring something to the table. But I'm a firm believer that your first hire has got to be somebody you'd give your wallet to, or somebody you'd want to be in a street fight with, if it came down to it. I believe in that. Your C-suite is loyal. Your executive committee has to be skilled, and then from there is how you build your business. That's my personal viewpoint.
Well, that's interesting. What advice would you give people that perhaps don't have those people available to them that they know?
So my advice would almost be a pushback. You do, and I'll tell you why. You're three T's. You're either training, you're tolerating, or you're terminating. You're always doing one of those three things in leadership. When you go out there and you pick your best friend or your closest friend, you also have to make a deal with yourself that you're training. I'm not talking about them being good for the job or competent. I'm talking about them having a. They have to believe in you. You're the one. You're the one with the vision. You're the one with the plan. That first hire just has to help execute your vision. They just have to be able to follow instruction. So that means you have to be willing to train. You have to be willing to train and tolerate. If you can manage those two things, then that person is in your circle. You have people that are loyal to you all the time, whether you recognize it or not. Nobody gets anywhere alone. You can go fast alone, far you go together. So that person is there. But I think what sometimes people don't accept is that the trade-off is you are training and you are tolerating a lot in the beginning because they didn't have the natural competency, but that's okay. You'll eventually get to a point where you're making an inverse decision. But I think those early day sacrifices are important.
Okay. So you hired your best friend. Great.
Yes.
How did that crucial first hire significantly impact your startup's growth trajectory?
I was fortunate that my best friend is opposite of myself. I would consider myself probably a bit more political, a bit more agreeable, and I consider him a bit more of a hammer, a bit more rough. In that regard, the greatest impact that occurred, there was a decision on client acquisition, a certain class of client that I myself didn't want to take on. I was worried about the additional drama. I was worried about, just the headache of managing those people because I'm political. So when I think of onboarding clients, I'm thinking of how do we manage all of these expectations and, how are we handling all of this? I'm thinking political. He's thinking bottom line. He's like, there's revenue here. Let's go do it. The greatest impact to the business was that second hire grew us by 500% because he forced me to go down a vertical that I originally wouldn't have. So we had made our business in sort of individual retail client basis. And he came to me and said that there's a corporate angle here. We can go take on entire companies, sort of go to head management and take on entire companies, be their solution for financial consultant. And I thought, man, it's one thing when I'm going to a household. It's another thing when I'm going to a business who, if he has a bad month, is really going to be squeezing on me to make his return as high as it could possibly be. But he was very confident that we would be successful, and that in the instances where there were tough conversations to be had, that we would have developed the aptitude. It's his greatest contribution, the growth of the business by going down a vertical I wouldn't have gone naturally.
That's a pretty amazing story. What are some of the qualities you look at for potential clients when you're looking to build that startup team?
And potential clients or potential team members?
Potential candidates.
Candidate. Okay. I personally like entrepreneurs. So I like people who wanted to start their own business. Now, this is going to sound, hopefully it doesn't sound indelicate, but I think there's a value to an entrepreneur. What's an entrepreneur? An entrepreneur is somebody who's willing to work it like it's their own, somebody who's willing to do the late hours, somebody who will proudly wear the brand on their chest, but they're not going to give you a penny because, their bread has to get buttered as well. And I think that there's been a value. I used to ask that question in every interview. If money wasn't a factor, what would you do? If money wasn't a factor, what business would you start? And for every candidate that answered with something that I knew we could create under our company umbrella, they got hired. Because I realized I've unlocked it. And again, another thing my father told me, your business will grow if in the pursuit of their dreams, people are helping you fulfill yours. So it's always that, hey, what would you do if money wasn't a factor? I'll tell you what, I'd be a video editor. In my mind, it's already, okay, we're going to run a media component of our company. We're going to be doing videos. We're going to be doing social media. You're going to be in charge. Because in almost an indirect way, they are running their business. They are doing that dream. they're just doing it under a banner, and we're all now happy, right? So I like entrepreneurs. I love them actually because they'll work long hours. They'll come up with critical ideas. They'll be thinking of ways to pivot. They'll think of mitigating expenses, which is key when you're in a startup, because they'll have an understanding that we all got to get to the finish line. And it really won't just be about a check for them. It'll subconsciously be about the fulfilling of a dream that maybe they haven't been able to do in a long time.
That's quite interesting, actually. All the personality sort of profiling tools I've come across over the years, I've never come across one that measured entrepreneurship.
It could be. It's worked. It's worked for me. Every single person. I mean, the trade-off though is that the moment you are no longer rewarding that component, they will leave. So that's the trade-off. But if you can dead hit it, they're not leaving, and they will be kings and queens amongst the masses.
Okay, well then you bring up a really interesting point. If you don't satisfy their needs, they'll leave.
Yep.
Therefore, in your opinion, what are the essential qualities of a great leader in a startup environment?
I think that it's always important to know your core competency. So, and not to overstep. So, for example, because I like entrepreneurs, I have waived the right to micromanage because they need to feel like what they're doing is their business. So that's the trade-off. I cannot break that rule. The moment I begin to break that rule is the moment they feel like they're being micromanaged, is the moment they feel like their entrepreneur lifestyle is perhaps not what they want. Then they start thinking I can get more money and not have as much stress. Then they start thinking this is not even my company. Then they walk out of the door. So I think it's just understanding. In politics, they call it the social contract. There are rights and freedoms that you waive in exchange for something. So you will pursue your core desire freely and perhaps with only, monthly or weekly check-ins, minimal input from me. I say it all the time. I am merely here to point us in a direction. You are there to determine how we get there. Even if I don't understand what you're doing, I put you in place because it's your job, So I think, the core thing to know for me is it's that simple. I cannot micromanage my people. I think it would create an environment that they would feel betrayed the culture that was sold to them in our initial interview.
That's interesting. I mean, going back to Pep, I mean, like when Pep took over Man City, as we're using him as an example, that was very much a startup again. It was a startup team. What's interesting, in all the years he's been there, very few people opt to leave him. So that's got to be there's a lesson to be learned there in leadership for sure. And I should just say, for most, you look at most football managers, when they take over a club, the chances are the existing team doesn't survive anyway.
Correct.
Because they've got their own ideas on how they want to build a team. So and that's for all sports teams actually, which means when you're looking at sports teams, they are literally your equivalent of a startup.
Yeah, I love it for that. My favorite manager for that reason is, well, let's not go political, but my favorite managers are because of their ability to, come in and galvanize troops towards a singular goal. It helps sometimes even to play for a guy you don't like, but you think he's a genius. I think that's what Steve Jobs was. People say it all the time. Steve had an idea every 30 seconds. He was a jerk. But people they marvel at you knowing your lane, and I just come up with an idea every 10 seconds, so they'll follow you.
You know what, though? The teams that were well under Steve Jobs didn't think he was a jerk.
Very true.
That's the interesting thing. They actually were his teams. There's all the people that didn't enjoy the whole culture and the atmosphere, and perhaps were not the A players within that organization. Now, they thought he was a jerk. But it does make you wonder who were the jerks. Something to consider.
Indeed.
So, look, you've been in a startup environment. Have you had any instances where your leadership skills were put to the test in your startup? And more importantly, if so, how did you manage to navigate that situation?
Ooh, that's a good one. There's a couple stories I could think of. One in particular, we were working in cryptocurrency at the time. There's this young guy, he had come from a bank, but the guy was a genius when it came to understanding this emerging technology space. I'll say this as a nugget so he knows I'm talking about him. Once we were in the office, the guy dead hit the issue with COVID. January 2019, he looks up and he goes, guys, this is a serious problem. The world is going to shut down in 2 months. Dead hit COVID. The guy's a genius. Brain operates on a level that I still marvel at. I think about him sort of in this almost mystic way. But he was immature. He struggled with focus. So the thing is, to get the best out of him, the job is I have to empower him enough. So I tell him, man, it's like a boxer, it's like those Rocky films. You're the best ever. Nobody can touch it, So you let him go, but you got to reel him in because you got to teach him maturity. You got to give him skills. And there's one day we're at the office, and because I think I've come off about a good 2 weeks of giving him the juice. You're the king of this realm, and he had taken his pants off, and he had his pants just lying around. It's still an office, for goodness sake. So I walked. Hey, whose pants are these? Hey, it's mine. Oh, well, why do you have your pants off? You're just gonna leave your pants hanging around the office? Now, when I said that, I thought he was gonna just grab the pants. Sorry, put them away. But he starts to challenge me, and I realize it's because he's thinking I'm a genius. I'm the best ever, So he starts to, the pants are there because, and now it's becoming a bit of a back and forth. The office isn't that big, so now the people have gathered, and then there's this fine balance where I'm thinking, okay, I have to win this exchange, or I lose the team forever. So I got to make an example out of him, but he's my best guy. He's a genius. And that was a hard one. So I sent him home. I said, hey, man, go home. He goes home. I huddle everybody together. I said, I'm sorry you guys had to see that, but nobody's more important than the company. And you all know I think he's a genius. I nodded, yeah, agree. And they go back and they sit down. When he comes back the next day, I have a conversation with him. The key, though, with the team meeting, because I know what's going to happen. They're going to finish work. They call, hey, Con. But one thing I made sure that everybody could tell him, because he's going to say, hey, what did he say after I left? And what did everybody reinforce? Well, he said you're a genius, but then he had to. So he understood, but I did not undercut what I'd been telling him, and I didn't lose the guy. I didn't lose the team. But that one I always remember, because, the guy had his pants on. He had to go. But, he's my best guy, so what do you do?
Well, I've never heard that one before, so that's an interesting one. So 2016, you hit the startup phase.
Yeah.
How do you continue to evolve your leadership style to meet the changing needs of the business and the team?
My greatest gift to the Drive Group as a company was when I took on the challenge in 2017 of being the head of operations for another business, the tech company, doing the two things simultaneously. Was the greatest gift of all. I worked under someone else. I was the number two, which was an incredible ego check. You realize that there is no such thing as a hierarchy. There's only roles in a business. We all just serve different purposes. It was a different vertical. Obviously, at the tech startup, we were doing fundraising. I wasn't in the funding position. And then the key just became that a good leader wears many hats. A good leader is capable of wearing many hats. Or at the very least, that's what I took from it. That I would, I wanted my team to always see me in the mud with them. So if we're working late, I'm staying. Even if what we're doing is nowhere near my skill level, if it's in a virtual environment and you call me, I'm up. I don't care if I'm out to dinner. I don't answer and say I'm out to dinner. I come out? What is it? We're in the trenches. We're together. Just a team that knows you'll bleed with them. But also, I don't over glorify your own struggle. So if you're pushing late hours, don't tell anybody. They'll see it. If you're pulling something off don't tell anybody. They'll see it, because when you show up after a week with a miracle new client or a new revenue stream, subconsciously they'll think, oh man, this guy's been working the whole time and he's been there in my corner. Here we go, I'll fight for this guy or for this woman, depending on who's taking that position. But that's what I'd say it was. It was working the two businesses simultaneously is the greatest gift of my life.
Awesome. But Trivelle, our time has come to an end. It's been awesome. If people want to hook up with you, follow you, etc., what do they need to do?
So I always encourage people to, like I'm sure people can tell them company first, brand first. So I encourage you to follow, if you want to follow me, follow the company. It's The Drive Group Inc. On Instagram. So at The Drive Group Inc. on Instagram. And if you just want to take a look at our wider content online, go to our website, www.thedrivegroup.ca. Again, www.thedrivegroup.ca. Links there, you'll see to our YouTube. We have long form business content where we're looking at different things like the debt ceiling, like changes in politics, which we avoided here today, sort of market and economy shifts. And then obviously our Instagram is fantastic, where you're getting small forms of that content, plus information on our contest, Drive 250, where we give an entrepreneur an opportunity at $250,000. So we're proud of both those things, and that's what I'll drive people to.
Now, awesome. Thank you very much, Trivelle. Now, if you've enjoyed today's episode and you think other people can benefit, make sure, number one, you like it, please, because we enjoy likes. It helps us with the algorithm. It helps other people see our content. Share it with the other people so they can benefit too. And remember to subscribe so that you don't miss future episodes, because you don't want to miss another guest like Trivelle. Not that there's going to be another one like him. But yeah, always subscribe. And if there's anything you want to go deeper into, you can head over to Boolkah.com and get in touch. So Trivelle, thank you so much. It's been amazing. You've been a great guest. Nice having you. And remember, failing to learn is learning to fail.